When a millionaire saved a pregnant woman from a wildfire, no one expected the heartbreaking secret that would change both their lives forever. Before we dive into the story, share in the comments where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The flames danced across the horizon, painting the California sky an angry orange. In his $10 million home, Lucas Hayes stood frozen before a silver-framed ultrasound photo, the last reminder of the family he'd lost. The evacuation warning blared on his phone, but he couldn't move. Not yet. Not while holding this piece of his past. The wildfire was coming. He knew he had to leave. 15 minutes later, Lucas's custom Range Rover crawled through the chaos of evacuating vehicles. Smoke choked the air and embers rained down like deadly snowflakes. Through the haze, he spotted something that made his heart stop. A stranded car, hazard lights blinking weakly, and inside a heavily pregnant woman clutching her belly. For a moment, he was back there. 3 years ago, on another desperate night, when he'd been too late to save them. Sarah Martinez hadn't planned on dying today. At 8 months pregnant, she had a whole life ahead of her. But now, trapped in her dead car with flames approaching and no one stopping to help, she felt hope slipping away. Her hands trembled as she rubbed her swollen belly, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Lucas's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed at him to keep driving, to outrun not just the fire but the memories threatening to overwhelm him. He hadn't been able to save his wife Emma and their unborn child that night. The guilt had haunted him every day since. But this time could be different. Without fully processing his decision, Lucas yanked the wheel, positioning his SUV next to the stranded car. Through the smoke, his eyes met Sarah's, terror meeting desperation. "Get in!" he shouted through the window. "Now!" Sarah hesitated for a split second, her hand on her belly. The flames were getting closer, turning nearby trees into torches. "Trust me," Lucas pleaded, his voice cracking. "Please." What happened next would set in motion a chain of events that would heal old wounds, reveal shocking truths, and prove that sometimes the greatest acts of courage come from our deepest pain. But first, they had to survive. The doors had barely closed when Lucas slammed the accelerator. Sarah clutched the armrest, her other hand protectively covering her belly as the SUV swerved through the chaos. The fire chased them like a living thing, hungry and relentless. "Thank you," Sarah managed between ragged breaths. I thought no one would stop." Lucas kept his eyes on the road, weaving between abandoned vehicles. His jaw tightened as memories threatened to surface. "I couldn't just leave you there." A burning branch crashed onto the road ahead. Lucas yanked the wheel, taking them off the main highway onto a narrow service road. The SUV bounced violently, and Sarah let out a small gasp of pain. "The baby?" Lucas asked, his voice sharp with concern. "We're okay," Sarah assured him, though her face was pale. "Just scared." Through the smoke, Lucas caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. She couldn't be more than 25, wearing scrubs beneath a light jacket. A hospital ID badge hung from her neck. Sarah Martinez, labor and delivery. "You're a nurse?" he asked, trying to keep her talking, keep her calm. "Yeah, was heading home from a shift when—" She stopped mid-sentence as another contraction gripped her. This one seemed different. Lucas noticed her discomfort. "How far along are you?" 8 months, she managed. "It's too early. These contractions, they shouldn't be happening." The irony wasn't lost on Lucas. Of all the people he could have stopped to help, it had to be a pregnant woman in distress. Emma's face flashed in his mind. Her smile, her laugh, the way she'd looked that last morning before everything went wrong. A sudden explosion rocked the air as a propane tank blew somewhere behind them. Sarah screamed, and Lucas instinctively reached out, steadying her as the SUV fishtailed. "I've got you," he said firmly. "Both of you." The words surprised him as much as they did her. For 3 years, he'd avoided anything that reminded him of impending fatherhood. Now, here he was making promises to a stranger. Sarah studied his face in the orange glow of the fire. "You're Lucas Hayes, aren't you?" The tech millionaire who disappeared after... She stopped herself, realizing too late what she was saying. Lucas's hands tightened on the wheel. Everyone knew the story. The brilliant entrepreneur who lost his wife and unborn child in a tragic accident, then vanished from public life. He'd thrown himself into isolation, building his fortune higher while his soul crumbled. "Yes," he said simply, "I am." Before Sarah could respond, something large and burning crashed onto the road ahead. Lucas swerved hard, taking them deeper into the hills. The SUV's navigation system was useless now. They were off any marked road. "I know a place," he said, more to himself than to Sarah. "If we can reach it." Sarah doubled over suddenly, a cry of pain escaping her lips. This contraction was stronger than the others. "Something's wrong," she whispered, real fear in her voice. "The stress, the smoke, it's too much." Lucas felt his chest tighten. Not again. He couldn't lose another mother and child, not when he had the power to prevent it. He pressed the accelerator harder, the engine roaring as they climbed higher into the hills. His private retreat was up here, a fortified compound he'd built after Emma's death. It had its own medical supplies, generator, even a basic clinic. But as they rounded the next bend, both of them froze. A wall of flame stretched across the road, cutting off their escape route. Behind them, the way they'd come was already consumed by fire. They were trapped. Lucas gripped the wheel harder, his mind racing. The wall of flame roared before them, and Sarah's labored breathing filled the cabin. He'd been here before, trapped, desperate, with lives hanging in the balance. But this time would be different. "Hold on," he commanded, throwing the SUV into reverse. "There's another way." Sarah clutched her belly tighter, trying to steady her breathing. "The baby's moving so much," she said, her voice tight with worry. "It's like he knows we're in danger." "He?" Lucas asked, desperate to keep her talking as he navigated through the smoke. A faint smile crossed Sarah's face despite the pain. Just a feeling. His father didn't want... She stopped, composing herself. It doesn't matter now. Lucas caught the pain in her voice, different from the physical discomfort racking her body. He recognized it all too well, the sound of someone carrying a burden alone. The SUV crested a small hill, and Lucas's eyes locked onto a barely visible trail cutting through the brush. It was dangerous, hardly more than a deer path, but it led to the back entrance of his compound. "There's something you should know," he said, guiding the vehicle onto the rough trail. After I lost them, I built a place up here. Private, secure. It has medical supplies." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "The rumors were true. They said you disappeared into some fortress in the hills, but..." Another contraction cut off her words, this one drawing a sharp cry of pain. Lucas pressed harder on the accelerator, every bump and dip threatening to tear the SUV apart. The smoke was getting thicker, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. "Almost there," he assured her, though his own heart was racing. "Just hold on." Through the haze, massive gates began to materialize, steel and concrete rising like a fortress from the mountainside. Lucas fumbled for the remote on his keychain, his hands shaking as he pressed the button. Nothing happened. He pressed again, harder this time. The gates remained stubbornly shut. "No, no, no," he muttered, hitting the button repeatedly. The power must be out, even his backup systems overwhelmed by the fire's fury. Sarah's face had grown paler, her breathing more labored. "Lucas," she whispered, "I think my water just broke." The words hit him like a physical blow. In his mind, he was suddenly back in that hospital room 3 years ago, hearing similar words from Emma, the monitors beeping frantically, the doctors rushing in, the world falling apart. A loud crack snapped him back to reality as a burning tree crashed down behind them, blocking their retreat. They were trapped between the fallen tree and the unyielding gates, with a baby deciding to come at the worst possible moment. Lucas looked at Sarah, then at the gates, his mind racing. There was a manual release, but reaching it meant crossing the exposed ground between them and the gate. With the fire this close, stepping outside was nearly suicide. But staying in the car was certain death. "I have to try," he said, reaching for the door handle. "When I say run, you run. Understand?" Sarah nodded, one hand still on her belly, the other gripping the door handle. The same fear he'd seen in Emma's eyes that last day now reflected in Sarah's, but this time he had a chance to change the ending. This time he wouldn't fail. The heat hit Lucas like a physical wall as he stepped out of the SUV. Embers swirled through the air like angry fireflies, each one a potential threat. He kept low, moving quickly toward the manual release panel hidden beside the gate. Behind him, Sarah's sharp intake of breath cut through the roar of the flames. "Lucas!" she cried out, her voice tight with panic. He spun around to see her doubled over against the SUV, one hand braced against the hot metal. The contractions were getting closer. Time was running out. Sweat poured down his face as he reached the panel, yanking it open with trembling hands. The backup release was supposed to be simple, just pull the red lever. But 3 years of disuse had left it rusted. Stubborn. "Come on," he growled, throwing his weight against it. The metal groaned in protest. A sudden memory flashed through his mind. Emma, standing at their front door, her hand on her belly. "The baby's coming," she'd said, excitement mixing with fear in her voice. He'd grabbed the wrong keys that day, wasted precious minutes searching for them, minutes that might have made the difference. The lever finally gave way with a screech of protest. The gates shuddered, then slowly began to part. "Now!" Lucas shouted, running back to Sarah. He wrapped an arm around her waist, supporting her weight as they hurried through the opening. Every step seemed to bring another contraction, but Sarah pressed on, her determination matching his own. The compound rose before them, a modern fortress of concrete and steel built to withstand any disaster. But it wasn't the building's strength that had drawn Lucas to create it. It was its isolation, a place where he could hide from the world that had taken everything from him. Until now. They stumbled through the front door just as another explosion rocked the hillside. The air inside was cool, filtered, a stark contrast to the inferno outside. Emergency lights cast a soft blue glow through the halls. "The clinic," Lucas said, guiding her forward. "It's just down here." Sarah's grip on his arm tightened. "How do you have a clinic in your house?" "After Emma." He swallowed hard. "After I lost them, I promised myself I'd never be helpless again. I studied emergency medicine, built this place, stocked it with everything I could think of." "Everything except a doctor," Sarah managed through gritted teeth. A ghost of a smile crossed Lucas's face. "No, but I've got something better, a labor and delivery nurse." They reached the clinic, a room that could have been transplanted directly from a high-end hospital. Sarah's eyes widened as she took in the state-of-the-art equipment, the fully stocked cabinets, the delivery bed waiting like a prophecy. "You did all this because of her?" she asked softly. Lucas helped her onto the bed, his movements gentle despite his racing heart. "I did it because I failed them. I wasn't prepared. I didn't." His voice caught. "I couldn't save them." Sarah reached out, catching his hand. The gesture surprised them both. "Lucas," she said, her voice steady despite her pain, "what happened to your wife wasn't your fault." Before he could respond, she gasped, squeezing his hand hard enough to make him wince. This contraction was different, longer, stronger. "The baby's coming," she whispered, fear and awe mixing in her voice. "It's too early, but he's coming now." Lucas felt the familiar panic rising in his chest. The last time he'd been in a room like this, with a woman in labor. No. He couldn't think about that now. Sarah needed him. This baby needed him. He moved quickly, gathering supplies with practiced efficiency. His hands knew what to do, even if his heart was threatening to shatter. "Talk to me," he said, pulling on surgical gloves. "Tell me what you need." Sarah's professional instincts kicked in, merging with her body's demands. She began directing him, her voice growing stronger as she focused on the task at hand. Outside, the wildfire raged on. But inside this room, a different kind of force was taking over. Every contraction brought them closer to a moment that would change both their lives forever. Then, Sarah's voice cut through the tension, sharp with worry. "Something's wrong." Lucas's blood ran cold. The monitors were showing patterns he recognized, the same ones that had appeared on Emma's screens moments before everything went wrong. If you're enjoying this story so far, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. It costs you nothing, but for us, especially in these early days, it means the world. Let's continue with what happens next. He looked at Sarah, saw the fear in her eyes, and made a decision. He wouldn't let history repeat itself. Not this time. "Tell me exactly what you're feeling," Lucas demanded, his voice steady despite the fear gripping his chest. Sarah's medical training warred with her panic. The baby's heart rate is dropping, and there's pressure, different from before, like he's... She stopped, her face contorting with another contraction. Lucas checked the monitors, his mind racing through everything he'd studied. He'd spent countless nights in this room, practicing scenarios, preparing for a moment he never thought would come. Now it was here, and a cruel twist of fate had made it a mirror of his worst nightmare. "The cord," Sarah gasped between breaths. "Check if it's wrapped." He was already moving, his hands steady as he examined her. 3 years of obsessive study crystallized into this moment. "It is, but I know how to fix this." His fingers moved with careful precision, guiding, adjusting. Emma's doctor had explained what should have been done after it was too late. Lucas had replayed those words thousands of times, torturing himself with the knowledge that had come too late to save his family. But not too late to save this one. "Hold on," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to Sarah or himself. "Just hold on." Sarah's next push brought a cry of pain that echoed through the clinic. But this time, Lucas didn't freeze. This time, he was ready. With a series of skilled movements, he freed the cord. The monitor's frantic beeping steadied, the baby's heartbeat returning to normal. "You did it," Sarah breathed, relief flooding her face. "How did you—" Another contraction cut off her words, but this one was different. Productive. "He's coming," Lucas announced, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah, you need to push now." She bore down, her strength amazing him. Outside, the fire's roar seemed to fade, as if even nature was holding its breath for this moment. Then, suddenly, a new sound filled the room, the strong, angry cry of a newborn baby boy. Lucas held him carefully, this tiny miracle who had defied the odds. Through tears he hadn't realized were falling, he checked the baby quickly, professionally. Perfect. Healthy, despite being early. "Sarah," he said, his voice cracking as he placed the squirming bundle on her chest. "You have a son." She pulled her baby close, crying and laughing at the same time. The boy's wails softened as he found his place against his mother's heart. Lucas stepped back, overwhelmed by the mixture of joy and grief washing over him. He had done it. He had helped bring a new life into the world, in the same room he'd built to remember a life lost. "Lucas," Sarah called softly. He looked up to find her watching him, her eyes full of understanding. "Thank you, not just for saving us from the fire, but for this, for being here, for not giving up." He nodded, unable to speak. His hands were shaking now that the crisis had passed. The adrenaline was fading, leaving him raw, exposed. Through the clinic's reinforced windows, a dull orange glow still painted the sky. The fire was moving on, but its passage had changed everything. In trying to save Sarah and her baby, Lucas had somehow begun to save himself. But as he watched mother and child bond in those first precious moments, he had no idea that the biggest revelation was yet to come. A truth that would shake the very foundation of his carefully constructed isolation and force him to confront the real reason he'd been drawn to help them that day. If you're moved by what you've seen so far, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. It costs you nothing, but for us, especially in these early days, it means the world. Let's continue with what happens next. The hours after the birth passed in a blur of medical checks and quiet moments. Lucas moved through them mechanically, his medical training guiding his actions while his mind struggled to process everything that had happened. Sarah slept fitfully on the clinic bed, one hand resting protectively on her son's tiny chest as he lay in the clear bassinet beside her. Lucas watched them from the doorway, unable to step fully into the room or walk completely away. The baby, Sarah had named him James, had his mother's dark hair and olive skin, but something about his face, the way his tiny brow furrowed in sleep, tugged at Lucas's memory. A soft whimper from Sarah drew him back to the present. She was stirring, her face contorted in discomfort. "Hey," he said softly, finally stepping into the room. "How are you feeling?" Sarah blinked slowly, orienting herself. "Like I just had a baby in the middle of a wildfire," she managed with a weak smile. "Is he?" "He's perfect," Lucas assured her, checking the monitors. "Strong vital signs, good color. He's doing amazingly well for being a little early." She studied him as he worked, her nurse's training evident in her attention to detail. "You move like you've done this 1,000 times." Lucas's hands stilled on the equipment. "I practiced. After Emma, I needed to understand what went wrong, what I should have done differently." "Lucas," Sarah started, but he cut her off. "You should try to eat something. The kitchen's stocked." A loud bang from somewhere in the compound interrupted him. Both of them froze, listening intently. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, already reaching for her baby. Lucas moved to the window. Through the smoke-tinged dawn light he could make out vehicles approaching the gate. Fire trucks, emergency response teams. "They're searching for survivors," he realized. The reality of the outside world came rushing back. Soon, questions would need to be answered, explanations given. Sarah must have seen something in his expression. "You don't want them to find us, do you?" He turned back to her, conflict evident on his face. "This place, no one knows about it. It's my sanctuary. My prison," she suggested gently. The word hit him harder than he expected. Before he could respond, James began to fuss. Sarah reached for him, wincing at the movement. "Let me," Lucas said automatically, lifting the baby with practiced care. But as he held James, something strange happened. The baby's eyes opened, fixing on Lucas with an intensity that seemed impossible for a newborn. "He looks just like his father," Sarah said softly. Lucas nodded absently, still transfixed by the baby's gaze. "You never mentioned him, the father." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "He died before James was born. Car accident, 3 months ago." "I'm sorry," Lucas said, finally looking up. But Sarah wasn't looking at him. She was staring at a framed photo on the wall, one he'd forgotten was there. It showed him and Emma on their wedding day. "Lucas," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Your wife, Emma, what was her maiden name?" The question seemed odd, but something in her tone made his chest tighten. "Martinez," he answered. "Emma Martinez." "Why?" Sarah's face went pale. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Unless—" She reached for her phone, fingers shaking as she pulled up a photo. Was this her? Lucas took the phone and the world seemed to tilt beneath his feet. There was Emma, younger than he'd known her, standing next to a teenage Sarah. They were smiling, their arms around each other. "She was my sister," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "My older sister, who left home at 18, who changed her name to escape our father, who I lost touch with until—" Lucas sank into the chair beside the bed, his legs no longer able to support him. James squirmed in his arms, making soft noises that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. "That's why you disappeared after the accident," Sarah continued, pieces falling into place. "Why, there was no funeral I could find. You didn't know about us, did you? And we never knew about you." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of unspoken questions. James's soft coos were the only sound in the room. "She never talked about her family," Lucas finally said, his voice hoarse, "only that she'd left them behind, that it was too painful." He trailed off, looking down at James. His nephew, he realized with a jolt. Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks. "After she left, our father forbade us from even saying her name, but I never stopped looking. Every few years I'd try to find her. Then, 6 months ago, I saw a news article about a tech millionaire's wife dying in a car accident. There was no photo, no details, but something made me keep digging." Lucas's hands tightened protectively around James. "The accident. It wasn't simple," he admitted. "We were arguing that night, about the baby, about her past. She was finally ready to talk about her family, but I was focused on the company, on building this place. If I had just listened." "Don't," Sarah said firmly. "Emma made her own choices. She protected us by staying away, protected herself, too. But, Lucas, she sent me one email, just before she died." He looked up sharply. "What?" Sarah's hands twisted in the sheets. "It just said, 'I'm going to be a mom. I wish you could know your niece or nephew.' I tried to respond, but the email bounced back. A week later, I saw the news about the accident." "A girl," Lucas whispered. "We were going to have a girl." James chose that moment to let out a sharp cry as if sensing the heavy emotions in the room. Lucas moved to hand him back to Sarah, but she caught his arm. "You're the only family he has left on his father's side," she said softly. "And now I find out your family on my side too." Through the window, they could hear voices getting closer. The rescue teams were making their way up the hill. Soon they would have to face the world beyond these walls. Lucas stood abruptly, still cradling James. "I need to show you something." He led Sarah, moving slowly due to her condition, down a hallway she hadn't seen before. At the end was a door with a keypad. Lucas entered a code and the door slid open silently. Inside was a nursery, perfectly preserved. Soft pink walls, a white crib, stuffed animals arranged carefully on shelves. Everything they had prepared for the daughter they'd never meet. "I couldn't pack it away," Lucas admitted. "Couldn't let it go." Sarah touched a tiny dress hanging in the closet, her fingers trembling. "Emma always loved pink," she whispered. "Stay," Lucas said suddenly, the word bursting from him like a confession. "Both of you. Not just until the fire passes. Stay here. Let me help. Let me be part of his life." Sarah turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "You already are. You saved him. You saved us both." A loud knock echoed through the compound. The rescue teams had reached them. The world was about to intrude on their private revelation. But before they answered, Sarah took James from Lucas's arms and placed him in the pink crib. The baby looked up at them, dark eyes wide as if he understood the significance of the moment. "Emma led me here," Sarah said quietly. "Maybe not to find you, but to find this, to help us both heal." Lucas nodded, unable to speak. Outside, the knocking grew more insistent. But in this room, time seemed to stand still as 3 generations of a broken family began to mend. What they didn't know was that this was just the beginning. The media storm that would follow, the questions about Lucas's disappearance, the truth about Emma's accident, it would all come to light. But for now, in this moment, they were simply family, found in the ashes of what was lost. The media descended like vultures. "Tech billionaire's secret bunker saves pregnant woman," screamed one headline. "Lost sister-in-law found in wildfire miracle," declared another. Within hours, news helicopters circled the compound, their cameras hoping to catch a glimpse of the story that had captivated the nation. Lucas stood at the reinforced windows, watching reporters gather at his gate like an invading army. Behind him, Sarah fed James in the quiet of the living room, both of them still processing the events of the past 24 hours. "They're saying I planned this," Sarah said softly, looking up from her son, "that I deliberately got caught in the fire to find you." Lucas turned, his jaw tight. I saw the comments, the conspiracy theories. They're even dragging Emma's accident back into the spotlight. As if on cue, his phone buzzed. Another message from his PR team, desperately trying to manage the situation. They wanted him to give an interview, to control the narrative. But how could he explain something he was still trying to understand himself? Maybe we should just tell them the truth, Sarah suggested, adjusting James against her shoulder. That we didn't know, that Emma— No, Lucas cut her off more sharply than he intended. They don't get to have her, not again. He remembered the media frenzy after Emma's death, the speculation about their marriage, the hints that there was more to the accident than he'd revealed. They'd painted him as either a grieving widow or a suspicious husband, depending on the day's angle. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. The security system was alerting him to another visitor at the gate, but this one was different. The cameras showed a police car. They have questions about Emma's accident, Lucas said, his voice hollow. Things I never answered 3 years ago. Sarah stood carefully cradling James. What kind of questions? Before Lucas could respond, his phone rang. The screen showed a name he hadn't seen in years, Detective Michael Chen, the officer who'd investigated Emma's accident. With a deep breath, Lucas answered. Detective. Mr. Hayes. Chen's voice was professional but carried an edge. We need to talk about your sister-in-law's miraculous appearance and about some new evidence in your wife's case. Lucas's blood ran cold. What evidence? Let's just say those emails between Emma and Sarah weren't the only ones we found. There were others sent the night of the accident. You told us you and Emma weren't communicating that evening, that you were at the office. Sarah watched Lucas's face pale. What is it? She whispered. Lucas held up a hand, his heart pounding. Detective, whatever you think you found. We know she was trying to reach you, Chen continued. We know she was desperate to tell you something, and now, 3 years later, her sister shows up at your door. That's one hell of a coincidence, Mr. Hayes. The room seemed to spin. Lucas gripped the edge of the desk, steadying himself. You don't understand, he started, but Chen cut him off. I'm coming up. We can do this quietly, or we can do it with a warrant. Your choice. The line went dead. Sarah stepped closer, her face etched with concern. Lucas, what aren't you telling me about the night Emma died? He turned to her, seeing Emma's eyes in her sister's face, the same determination, the same ability to see through his carefully constructed walls. There's something you need to know, he said finally, about the night of the accident, about why Emma was really on that road. But before he could continue, James let out a sharp cry, not his usual fussy sound, but something more urgent. Sarah's eyes widened as she checked him. He's burning up, she said, her nurse's training taking over. Lucas, something's wrong. The universe, it seemed, wasn't done testing them. As Lucas rushed to help, he caught his reflection in the window, and, for a moment, he saw himself as the world would soon see him, either a hero or a villain, with no room for the complicated truth in between. The police were coming. His nephew was sick, and the carefully buried secrets of that tragic night were about to resurface. What happened next would either redeem him or destroy everything he'd built. But this time, he wasn't alone. Sarah's medical instincts took over instantly. Get my bag from the clinic, she ordered, laying James on the couch. He needs a fever reducer, and I need to check his vitals. Lucas ran, his footsteps echoing through the compound. In the clinic, he grabbed Sarah's bag, but his eyes caught on something else. Emma's medical file, still sealed in its envelope after all these years. The one he'd never had the courage to open. When he returned, Sarah was taking James's temperature. 103.2, she said, her voice tight. This isn't normal for a newborn. We need to get him to a hospital. Lucas froze. The media's everywhere. And the police. I don't care about your secrets right now, Sarah snapped, sounding so much like Emma it made his chest ache. This is your nephew, Lucas. He needs help. The security system chimed again. Detective Chen was at the gate. Lucas looked at James, so tiny and vulnerable, then at the approaching police car on his security screen. Everything was colliding, past and present, truth and lies, redemption and guilt. "Okay," he said, making a decision. "There's a medical helicopter pad on the roof. I had it installed after, just in case. I can have a chopper here in 15 minutes. Sarah cradled James close, trying to soothe his whimpers. "And the police?" "I'll tell them everything," Lucas said, already dialing the helicopter service. About Emma, about that night, about why she was really on that road. He paused, looking at Sarah. About what she was coming to tell me. As he spoke to the helicopter dispatcher, Lucas caught his reflection again. The man who'd hidden from the world for 3 years was gone. In his place stood someone else, someone who finally understood that running from the past didn't erase it. James's cries grew weaker, concerning them both. Sarah pressed a cool cloth to his forehead while Lucas paced, waiting for the helicopter. "Emma was coming to confront me that night," he said suddenly, needing to get the words out. "She'd discovered something about the company, about funds I'd been moving. She thought I was embezzling." Sarah looked up sharply. "Were you?" "No." Lucas ran a hand through his hair. "I was building this place, spending millions off the books because I was paranoid about security. I couldn't tell her because I thought she wouldn't understand. But she'd figured it out, and she was furious that I didn't trust her." The sound of helicopter blades cut through the air. Through the windows, they could see Detective Chen's car reaching the main entrance. "She called me from the road," Lucas continued, his voice breaking. "Said she was coming to the office, that we needed to talk. I told her to wait until morning. If I had just listened." Sarah stood, James secure in her arms. "You can't change the past, Lucas. But right now, you can help save her nephew. You can choose to do what Emma would have wanted." The helicopter landed as Detective Chen's knocks echoed through the compound. Lucas took a deep breath, then pressed the intercom. "Detective," he said, "my nephew needs emergency medical transport. Give us 15 minutes, then I'll tell you everything." There was a long pause before Chen responded. 15 minutes, Hayes. Not a second more." Lucas turned to Sarah and James. "Let's go. It's time to stop hiding." As they rushed to the roof, the morning sun finally broke through the smoke-filled sky. The wildfire that had brought them together was dying, but its impact would be felt long after the ashes cooled. The hospital corridor buzzed with controlled chaos. Sarah had disappeared behind double doors with James, her nurse credentials granting her access even as she was relegated to worried mother. Lucas stood alone in the waiting area, torn between two urgent crises. Detective Chen sat nearby, his patience visibly wearing thin. "Time to talk, Hayes." Lucas sank into an uncomfortable chair, his eyes fixed on the doors where James had vanished. "What do you want to know?" "Start with the emails," Chen said, pulling out a tablet. "The ones Emma sent you that night. She wrote, 'I know what you've done. I know about the hidden accounts.'" He looked up at Lucas. "Care to explain?" Before Lucas could answer, a doctor emerged from the double doors. His face was carefully neutral, the kind of expression medical professionals perfect for delivering uncertain news. "Mr. Hayes?" the doctor called. Lucas stood so quickly he nearly knocked over his chair. "How is he?" "Your nephew is responding to treatment, but we found something concerning in his blood work." The doctor glanced at Detective Chen. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "He stays," Lucas said firmly. "No more secrets." The doctor nodded. "We found traces of a substance in James's system, something that shouldn't be there, something that suggests deliberate introduction." The implications hung heavy in the air. Chen was already reaching for his phone. "Are you saying someone poisoned a newborn?" Lucas demanded, his voice raw. "We're running more tests," the doctor assured him. "But, yes, that's our current theory." Lucas felt the world tilt beneath his feet. First Emma's accident, now this. It couldn't be coincidence. "Where's Sarah?" he asked. "Resting," the doctor replied. "The stress and the premature birth. She needs monitoring, too." Chen stepped forward. "Doctor, I need a full toxicology report. And Mr. Hayes, this changes things. Those company accounts you were hiding, what exactly were they for?" Lucas stared through the glass doors, watching the medical team work on his tiny nephew. "Protection," he said finally. "I was building safe houses, stockpiling supplies, after what happened to my parents." "Your parents?" Chen interrupted. "Their deaths were ruled an accident." "Were they?" Lucas turned to face the detective. "Or was that just easier than admitting someone might be targeting my family?" Before Chen could respond, a commotion erupted behind the double doors. Alarms blared. Medical staff rushed toward James's room. Lucas moved without thinking, pushing through the doors despite protests. He reached the room just as a nurse was pulling Sarah away from the crib. "He's crashing!" someone shouted. "Get a crash cart!" Sarah fought against the nurse holding her. "No, James, please!" Lucas caught her as she stumbled, both of them watching helplessly as the medical team worked to save the baby. In that moment, he saw Emma's face in his mind, the way she'd looked that last night, desperate to tell him something important, something about their parents' deaths, something about the company, something that had gotten her killed. And now, someone was trying to silence her last connection to this world, her nephew. Lucas pulled out his phone with trembling hands, dialing a number he'd hoped never to use. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. "Hayes? It's been 3 years." "Marcus," Lucas said, watching the doctors fight for James's life. "Remember what you found out about my parents' accident? About Emma? I need everything. Now." "Are you sure you want to open that door?" Marcus asked. "Some truths can't be buried again." Lucas held Sarah closer as she sobbed. "Someone's trying to kill my nephew. The same someone who killed my wife, I'm sure of it. No more hiding, no more running." There was a long pause on the line. "Check your email in an hour. And Hayes, watch your back." The call ended just as the medical team stepped back from James's crib. The lead doctor turned to them, his face breaking into a relieved smile. "He's stabilizing," he announced. "Whatever it was, we caught it in time." Sarah rushed to her son, her hands hovering over him as if afraid to touch. The tiny boy's color was already improving, his breathing steadier. But Lucas stood frozen, his phone still in his hand, because in that moment of crisis something had clicked into place, a pattern he should have seen years ago. The accidents that weren't accidents, the money trails that led nowhere, the secrets Emma had died trying to expose. Detective Chen appeared beside him. "Want to tell me what's really going on, Hayes?" Lucas looked at Sarah and James, then back at the detective. "Yes," he said finally. "But first, we need protection, because whoever killed Emma just tried to finish what they started, and I think I know why." Detective Chen studied Lucas for a long moment, then pulled out his phone. "I'm calling in a protection detail. Start talking." Lucas moved closer to Sarah and James, his voice low but steady. 3 years ago, I found irregularities in my company's research division. Projects with no paper trail, funding that disappeared into shell companies. "And Emma discovered this too?" Chen asked, taking notes. "Not exactly." Lucas touched James's tiny hand, reassuring himself with the strong pulse beneath his fingers. "She found something worse. Evidence that our parents' accident wasn't random, that someone had orchestrated it, along with several other accidents involving our company's researchers." Sarah looked up sharply. "What kind of research?" "Medical technologies, specifically genetic modifications." Lucas met her eyes. "The kind that could be passed down through bloodlines." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. "James," she whispered, "they're after him because he carries Emma's genes," Lucas finished. "And potentially whatever modifications our parents were working on before they died. Detective Chen's phone buzzed. Protection team's on the way, but Hayes, if what you're saying is true, it means someone inside my company is willing to kill to keep these secrets, Lucas cut in. They killed our parents when they got too close to the truth. They killed Emma when she figured it out. And now... He couldn't finish the sentence. The thought of anyone targeting his nephew made his blood boil. Sarah pulled James closer, her nurse's training evident in how she checked his monitors even while holding him. But why wait? Why not target me during the pregnancy? The fire, Lucas realized. They didn't know where you were until the media coverage, until they knew you'd found me. Chen's radio crackled. Protection team's here, and Hayes, we found something in Emma's old phone records. A call made minutes before the accident, not to you, but to a blocked number. Lucas felt his chest tighten. Can you trace it? Already did. Chen's expression was grim. It led back to your company's executive board, specifically to... The hospital lights flickered suddenly, then went dark. Emergency generators kicked in, casting everything in a dim red glow. Get back, Lucas shouted, just as the window exploded inward. The tunnels led them to safety, but Lucas knew this was just the beginning. In an unmarked safe house miles from the city, he watched Sarah rock James to sleep while Detective Chen coordinated with federal authorities. The truth about his company's research, about his parents' work, about Emma's death, it would all come to light now. He looks peaceful, Lucas said softly, approaching Sarah and James. Sarah smiled, touching her son's tiny hand. Hard to believe he's at the center of all this. Not just him, Lucas corrected her. Us, family. He sat beside them, finally allowing himself to feel the weight of everything that had happened. Emma was trying to protect this, not just the research, but the chance for our family to be whole again. Detective Chen approached with his phone. Hayes, you'll want to see this. Richard Zhang just confessed to everything. The federal raid on your company found all the evidence Emma had discovered. Lucas nodded, but his eyes stayed on James. In the end, it hadn't been his wealth, his preparations, or his technology that had saved them. It had been Emma, her love reaching beyond death through the sister she'd left behind and the nephew she'd never meet. What happens now? Sarah asked. Lucas thought about his fortress in the hills, built from fear and grief, about the pink nursery waiting for a baby who would never arrive, about second chances. We rebuild, he said simply. Not walls this time. Bridges. 2 months later, the headlines told a different story. Tech billionaire transforms company into medical research foundation. Hayes' family legacy continues through groundbreaking genetic treatment programs. From tragedy to hope, how a family rebuilt from ashes. But the real story wasn't in the headlines. It was in the quiet moments. Lucas teaching James to smile, Sarah bringing life back to the empty halls of the compound. A family healing together. Sometimes, late at night, Lucas would find Sarah in the pink nursery, now transformed into James's room. They'd stand together, watching him sleep, feeling Emma's presence in every peaceful breath he took. She led us here, Sarah would say. She's still protecting us. And Lucas would nod, finally understanding that the greatest fortresses aren't built of concrete and steel, but of love and trust and family. That sometimes the things we run from are the very things we need most. That healing comes not from hiding our wounds, but from letting others help us bear them. Through fire and fear, through loss and betrayal, they had found something precious, each other, and in the end, that was the greatest safety any of them could ask for. If you were moved by this story, remember, family isn't just about blood or birthright. It's about the people who stand with us in our darkest moments, who help us find light when we've lost our way. Sometimes the longest journey isn't measured in miles, but in the distance between two healing hearts. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to keep up with all our stories, and be sure to check out more emotional stories by clicking here on the end screen. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.